Welcome to this live edition of the Inspirational Insights podcast. With me is Lindsay Uittenbogaard. I had so much fun saying names. I'm Dawna Jones. I'm the host of the Inspirational Insights. And when I started this, actually, when I started my first podcast in 2008, the whole idea was to really look at things differently, widen the lens, see the world from a bigger point of view. And of course, you can't do that without shifting your perspective and without changing your perception of things, or at least examining it and understanding what is governing or how am I making sense of the world? How am I making sense of what somebody just said to me? It happens at multiple levels. Today, we're talking about teams and perception and you and how you can work with what you're taking in to really work better with teams. And so Lindsay is here to share that with us because she's done some pretty phenomenal work that applies to the workplace, essentially, but it also applies to you and your personal life. So, Lindsay, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, and good attempt to pronounce my surname. Don't worry, everybody has that issue. It's Dutch.
I'm on the west coast of Canada. Lindsay's in, where are you? You're in the Netherlands.
I'm in the Netherlands, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So don't be fooled by accents because they don't always place people. But that's one part of perception is to do that, at least in my experience, having wandered the world. Lindsay, tell me, how did you end up where you are with this understanding of perception and applying it to the work you do?
Yeah, sure. It's a bit of a story, and I didn't kind of go the typical kind of PhD route, and here we are with lots of learnings that have been distilled. It was a sort of combination of experience and knowledge, and I think to sort of sum it up, I was drawn to. I just am a bit of an action person, a bit of a kind of really like to get things moving, and I started in small businesses of teams of less than 10 people, and worked in different countries and different teams, and joined a small communications agency. And they sent me straight out to the Netherlands, which is where I'm still am. I wouldn't like to say ended up because we never know what's going to happen in the future, but that was 20 years ago. And they sent me into a large global energy organization of 100,000 people. And I was totally confused. And because I had a role to facilitate communication and connect people in organizations, I started in the knowledge sharing team and the internal university that they had. Um, I kept sort of searching around to think, oh God, should I be here? Imposter syndrome. If I'm confused, how the hell can I, facilitate communication? Um, but also looking at how disconnected everything was. And even though I had kind of clicked my heels and gone off to the Netherlands thinking, oh, wouldn't it be brilliant to see how the large organizations get everything done? And then how am I going to, now I'm in the big league. I realized that it's just, there's people who aren't seeing the same documents, they're not in the same room at the same time. They might have their own interpretation, they're talking in subgroups. Lots of things are happening without that information coming through to the relevant teams. All of the basic kind of stuff that I think anybody who's working in an organisation larger than 50 people have probably experienced. And I was standing in a room at a particular moment, and I remember it vividly. There were 20 people in the team, and it was like, right, let's have a huddle. The kind of like let's get together and connect. And as I was looking around, I was thinking, well, 5 people aren't here. This person doesn't know that, and I'm aware of it because they weren't in the meeting yesterday. That wasn't explained because we've only got 10 minutes. And I was just thinking, this is really disorganized. And it's the way that what people understand about their workplace just needs tidying up in a way. And that's a very female way to look at it. And it makes it sound really kind of, it's a very derogatory way to look at it. Oh, it needs tidying up, But actually, if the organizational goal is to improve EBITDA, as it was measured at that point, by 0.25%, and wouldn't that be amazing? I was thinking, well, if you got this all sorted out, you could make a lot more than 2.5% improvement, because what everybody does and says on a macro level every single day is move in your direction in what your organization in whatever direction, be that in the same line or in conflicting lines or in just different lines. And from then on, I'd started thinking, right, well, I'm going to take this insight, and I kind of grab hold of an idea and just kind of stick with it. And I didn't drop it, because it's like, this is my thing. And I got to become a member of staff there, and I got to become a manager there, and then a senior manager. And then I changed. I kind of got stuck. I changed to another organization, a multinational in the IT industry. And then I hopped across to telecoms. And over a 15-year period, I became the group head of internal communications. And I couldn't change a bloody thing, to be honest. It was really frustrating. And I just thought, this is, sorry, I'm not sure if I should use these words on live stream, but this whole understanding about using PR on the inside to get them engaged on a top-down basis is just bullshit. And I had studied communication meantime and got into some of the research that we'll probably discuss. But I went back to that team meeting that was standing in with the notion of, how do you actually capture what people know and then compare it to see where the gaps are? Because then you know what to fix. And that, over the last 8 years since I founded Mirror Mirror, is what led me to the work that I'm doing today.
Brilliant, brilliant. Now, we know that if you're on a team or working on a team, that what one person says and how somebody else interprets it can be radically different. What's that made of? What is perception made of when we break it down and unpack it and lift, pull up the hood, take a look and see, why are things so radically different? I mean, gosh, the world of politics today is a great place to see how diverse the perceptions can be and the interpretation, because it all kind of bundles up. Yeah. What have you learned about that? What's the gist of it for the listener?
I think a really nice couple of words to use that sort of help to understand the way it works is mental models, in the sense that since we are born, probably, we have an innate mental model about how things work, and but as every single input that comes into our brain is fashioned into layers upon layers of connecting threads of logic about how we understand the world. And if you're coming from, I don't know, say Japan or Asia, you've got a different cultural mental model about how things interrelate and how they react, and your experiences, how people have treated you, how you treat other people, the knowledge that every single piece of information that comes in through your senses is added to this growing kind of mental model, which is why people used to think, oh, you can't change. But of course, at any age, anybody can be redressing, the way they think and what they know and how they see the world. And sometimes pieces of information come in that don't fit in the mental model. And that's really disconcerting. It puts a big cognitive load on people. And if that's the case, the phrase, you mustn't make assumptions. That kind of is wrong, actually, because what the mental models do is they have to make assumptions, because otherwise we get stuck. And that's just the way humans are. Our brains just kind of go, cannot compute, this piece of information doesn't fit. And if it's really big and significant to your world, you'll be stuck there. So what do I do? So you'll go and try and either figure it out, or you'll just take a shortcut and make an assumption. And so we keep sort of either putting them together in ways of logic that's made sense, or we keep having to jump into new logic through assumptions to keep things making sense so that we can function. And that's effectively what's going on now. The combination of our senses in our mental models gives us beliefs and conclusions and the things that we work on to be able to function in the world.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, elsewhere on the podcast, I did an interview on worldview intelligence, which is, like mental models is something I've seen in teams all the time, and team dynamics. It shows up all the time. Worldview, I think, is the expanded definition, which is really about how do I see the world in a wider way. So mental models are sort of one of the things I've had in my experience. They're things, what have I done and seen in the past that form my belief about how things get done. So that's one thought. The second one is that with respect to assumptions in climates of uncertainty, and I mean, in my facilitation experience, we've lots of places where, projects are starting off and nobody knows how it's going to turn out, which is, the beauty of them. But you need assumptions every now and again just to establish some sort of stability in the ground, something to stand on. But if they're made unconsciously, it can be a mess, because down the road those assumptions come back to bite you if you don't, first of all, make them intentionally, know that you're making them. Secondly, check them and make sure they're still accurate and valid, because in a dynamic world that we're in, particularly now, things change fast, and you want to make sure that you're still on the right page with respect to the direction you're heading in. So I think assumptions can be pretty useful. The whole idea, don't make assumptions, is, I think, incredibly naive around context in particular. It's the assumption that the context is not changing. And I certainly see this in companies right now where they're pulling back from innovation because they're trying to get some stability from outside, when the stability actually comes from the inside. So
Totally.
yeah. Tell us more about your observations with teams on that, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, so when we talk about mental models, it doesn't mean that they're all right. Of course, like you say, I mean, they can, all of these assumptions, or even the information that we piece together, may be solid in themselves, but the way that we've pieced them together, or the context in which they are being applied, just may not fit. So if you've got, let's go back to this team of 20 people. That's quite a big team, but team of 20 people, they've each carrying around, if you can imagine these mental models behind them of layers and layers and layers and layers of inputs, thousands of inputs, millions, if you like, and they're everybody's field of vision, therefore, in terms of how they look at the world, it's unlikely it's going to be completely and complementary overlapping in the
Mm.
workplace. So even if somebody has started a new job and they haven't had the mess of being involved in work, but they understand their job contract, they understand their role in a certain way, they might have come to conclusions about how the company operates because they don't have much experience of it. You know, this, what we call misalignment between mental models, is where the problems start. And you could say, well, underneath every single problem in business today that is observable, project failures, attrition, disengagement, you name it, rework, overwork, burnouts, anything, you could say that underneath all of those observable problems, somewhere, somehow, there was misalignment in how people perceived the world through their mental models, because there was dissonance or flat out conflict. And if you look at it like that, you kind of get a gradation of you've got total agreement between people. Groupthink is another matter that we can come on to later, maybe. But you've got total agreement, and then you've got maybe coherence but complete agreement, and then you've got maybe a bit of dissonance, and you go right down to out and out conflict and complete. That's where the emotional side of it all comes in, and emotions play a part. But the trick is, and maybe this is where we're going with all of this, is, so what do you do about all of that? It is about, how do you combine into the relevant parts of the mental models between people in order to get people on the same page, is another way of talking about it, in order to be able to take action that doesn't conflict, so that people are pulling in the same direction.
Mm-hmm.
That's the challenge.
Right, right. I think a long time ago when I wrote my very first book, which was in 2003, he was part of Jack Canfield, Mark Victor Hansen, that crowd. And Jack at one point said, if there's 1,000 people in the room, there's 1,000 different perceptions of who I am. And I thought that was a really, simple one-liner of understanding that, the diversity of perspective is really what you need in order to get the full picture. You really, so the whole idea that if we eliminate the conflict side of it is what I'm aiming for in this comment. But the conflict side is where you take all this diversity and you go, let's parse out the value in this, because there's a lot of value in that messiness. But you need to have the leadership moxie to walk into it and ask a bunch of probing questions. You've developed some way of doing that that's probably less demanding on our leaders today, because it is an inner game. Let's face it. This work is not something you pull off the shelf and walk in and say, well, if I just apply this process, then all will be well. Yes, there's a point where that's true, but the person that's buying the process has to have done their own work. What do you notice with that in the work you're doing? How do you move through those territories, that zone?
Right. So at a high level, let's just say conceptually, the aim of the game is for people to be able to bring their mental models together so that they are on the same page, right? And in order to do that, the only way to go forward is tons of research out there on it, is through dialogue, because people make sense of the world and they check their assumptions through dialogue with other people. Now, there's another trick there, because language isn't perfect. And there's another trick there as well, because people have it's actually a capability. People can't just do it. They have to learn how to do that. And so having people kind of check out what are the key things that are in our shared zone, if you like, and how are we on the same page about those things is that's difficult, because how do you know which bits you're misaligned on and which bits you aren't? But let's say you have some awareness, and we can talk about that later, about where are the gaps, where are the areas of incoherence that we need to deal with, or dissonance. Um, what happens next is this process of learning. So it's about, how can you understand on a particular point, what does somebody else think? What do you make of that? What can you learn from that? And then what do you think that they can learn from, in order to be able to go through it? Now, people have been trying to have conversations with each other for millennia, since languages were around. I mean, everybody's trying to align. The problem is just these days, as you said, organizations are just extremely complicated, and there's a lot to align on. So the challenge isn't the fact that we can't talk to each other. It's just that there's so much to talk about, so little time. How do we then sort of organize that? And so there's a lot in there about the power of dialogue, and great dialogue, and facilitated dialogues, etc. Um, but in the end, let's say you've got enough, and you take some values like openness and respect, um, to be able to sit down and genuinely hear, how does somebody else see something. Let's just take something like, what's our shared what are our priorities? That's very concrete, isn't it? So that's a piece of strategic sort of alignment, if you like. That's an area of strategic alignment. What are our priorities? So in that process, dialogue process, we would really focus on the business of aligning as the main objective, as opposed to talking about something and, oh, by the way, are we aligned on the side, which is a bit of sort of annoying parallel line on the side. So we're focusing directly on actually getting on the same page and aligning. And we're talking about priorities. So I would then say to you, hey, Dawna, we've been working on these shared goals for a while. What do you think are the current priorities, and why? And you would be needing to articulate your view quite succinctly, and stick to the point. And that's another skill that's extremely difficult for people to do. So let's say you can do that, and I hear you, and I hear some new things, and I can ask questions of that. And then we switch turns. And that I then articulate to you, what's my view on our current priorities? And you can ask me questions. Now, in that process, what we can trust is that the machine of our brains, which operates unconsciously, whether we like it or not, will be pulling in information, because we've just been basically adding information into our senses that the brain is trying to sift out and chuck into our mental models, if it feels that they're valuable. And there will probably be things that we're learning from each other that will just create a slight shift and and small space that has also possibly a bit of empathy with it. So this dialogue thing that people think is kind of like, oh God, you can't scale that, and can't we do it digitally, or can't we outsource it? No, we can't. We really do have to dialogue about these things. And how much time will it save us if we get it right between us? Because otherwise we can actually work for, I don't know, maybe 10 weeks and go in different directions. What do we prefer? So this little conversation with us in our team, between you and I, that then results in, and here's the definition of alignment: agreement on certain actions as results. So what space was made, what shifts in our thinking occurred as we learned from each other, and what are the obvious next steps that we need to take based on that? Well, maybe we need some more information. Maybe we need to clarify something. Maybe we actually need to bring somebody else into the conversation who isn't here. Maybe we need to make a decision. Maybe we need to stop doing something, start doing something. Maybe we need to get help with the process of talking to each other because it's too difficult and we don't have the skills. But whatever it is that we agree to do, the alignment is the agreement on action within this shared clarity on what's our context. We don't actually have to agree on perceptions and opinions in between in our explanation, and persuade each other that my opinion is right or your opinion is right. So I'm talking about the process of alignment that is basically a kind of simple structure of a dialogue process that is about checking assumptions, and getting down to the real stuff to make sure that people are properly connected, that can just happen on iterative basis, which is the fundamental building blocks of an adaptive organization in complex environments, is to constantly iterate, find that incoherence, close those gaps, and keep checking and keep connected and investing in the team. And the emotional side, which we could also talk about, is empathy. As soon as I can empathize with where you're coming from, oh, she sees it like this, oh, that's her motivation. We actually do want to come together as groups. We actually do. We don't really want to have separate objectives and be separate people trying to compete with each other. Um, and the process of developing empathy means it's much more likely we're able to accept things that wouldn't be our own choice, because it's the acting as a single unit, acting as a team, that is the important part about alignment. So that's the process side of things. We could springboard off that to many
Yeah, well,
directions, of
gosh,
course.
yeah, in multiple directions. I mean, my head's just going like that. So yeah, we could springboard off that. Let me yeah, let's. What I want to do is quickly zip into group think for a sec, because I'm watching our time, and I know that especially if you're watching on LinkedIn, there's a time box around this. So let's explore this, because one of the things I noticed when I was facilitating is that groups would think alike, and they just ran around in circles. It was kind of like watching a racetrack, you're just running around in circles. And so because you've got a certain amount of group think, and yet you've got diverse opinions, then they're being denied, because there's this safety and let's all think the same way. There's a nuance which people may not like, but we don't live we live in the world between black and white, despite the fact that black and white is the easy part. You're right, I'm wrong, I'm right, you're wrong, that part's easy, but the real movement is in the middle. And so with groupthink, I find that groups started getting to the place where they just might as well be talking to each other, because they're not going to go anywhere as long as they're running in circles. What are your observations, and how do you work with groupthink?
Well, there's a couple of things, because I mean, it all starts with questions in terms of dialogue. I mean, are people asking each other the right questions? Are they saying, oh, do you have a different point of view? But it's not just about alignment in teams, it's alignment in and between teams and across organizations. I mean,
Mm.
every team has stakeholders and connections with other parts of the organization. So from my point of view, if there's not somebody in the team asking questions, and there's not people outside of the team asking questions to challenge the assumption that everybody is correct on the right answer, or routinely challenging that, that's another part of the capability. So when we look at capability building, it's not just about how can we express, how can we learn, but how can we see things from the meta picture to really sort of keep on top of alignment, not just between us, but within our context. And if there is that, then maybe the group think is correct and everybody is okay. That's where I would come from it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting, because groupthink and alignment, or sorry, groupthink and all the horses pulling in the same direction are quite different, and you have to know what the differences are in order to spot them in the room. To what I've witnessed in my experience is a groupthink is when harmony is assumed to have no conflict or no difference of opinion. That happened on one team I was working with, and people were just silenced, and to a brutal point, and they were really feeling denied. Their voice was being denied, because this value around harmony denied the opportunity to work through a different perspective, a different point of view. And if you can't do that today, you're really blindsiding yourself, because you really can't see what's coming. You can't see what's on the periphery emerging, or what the sense of it coming up through the dynamic that you're in, through the chaos of organizational life. You can't see what's emerging, and so it's incredibly important to have that. And the other thing that comes to mind is when teaching, when I was, like, eons ago in another lifetime, one of my colleagues would dress up as a character and come into the class and go, why, and he would just play it out. And it was that challenge to sort of say, we need to ask ourselves, why are we doing this? What are we on? Are we on purpose? And it was an intentional role, to have someone come in and challenge the thinking. And I think that's, it was brilliant. It's chaotic and absolutely brilliant, because it assigned a role that the same person doesn't have to do it all the time, But it's that idea that we need to challenge our thinking in order to step forward with any kind of confidence that we're in that level of alignment where we're all, horses are all pulling in the right direction, in the same direction.
Yeah, and that sort of links into psychological safety actually, because it's, if people feel that they really do consciously have something bubbling up that they want to say but feel they can't, um, it's something about disturbing the harmony of the group that would cause trouble rather than want to preserve the harmony of the group because it's good, sort of the flip side of it. And I think the psychological safety thing is obviously well known as being something that doesn't help teams because they can't leverage the different perspectives in the room and they can't learn from each other, which is something to get over. And I think the interesting thing from the research is that psychological safety is just one of several behaviors, if you like, or conditions um, that play into the whole team alignment piece. So there's, the connection between teams that are aligned. And so what I mean again by that isn't complete agreement, but it is clarity on the strategic context, and then agreement to take a certain course of action together. And in between all of that, there's this psychological safety, there's interdependence. Do they recognize where the connections are between them all each? um, do they are they confident? The group potency thing about how confident are they that they can achieve their goals? Is the strategy any good? And so there's a number of factors around what's known as team learning behaviors that really evidence the connection between aligned teams and effective workplaces, which makes everybody, which is a much more rewarding place to work anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, psychological safety is about building trust. It's not a condition that has to be met before conversations can be had. It is about the using the mess to develop that kind of trust in each other so that I can challenge your thinking and you don't make it, take it personally. You recognize that it's about the issue. We put the issue in front of us, not the, so it changes the thing from this to something that's more of a triangle. I actually have a drawing of this somewhere that I need to be a better illustrator, but it's that idea of pulling yourself out of this and into, a view where you look at it and go, okay, there's value here. I just need to spot it. I just need to sense it more, more from that point of view. So
Yeah,
can we talk about sorry, go
sorry, I
ahead.
just want to say I have seen a micromanager situation where the team didn't want to say anything because they just know that whatever happens, it's not going to be worth anything. It's not going to go anywhere because it's not being heard, because there's a sort of control issue, which is another sort of angle on psychological safety, if you like, which is really sad, actually, isn't it? Yeah,
Yep.
anyway.
Yep. I had a situation where a colleague of mine was facilitating. He was part of the organization and he was facilitating something with the executive team. And they said, this is what we want you to do. And so the team went in, spent 2 days, worked it through. When it came out, the executives came in and said, that's not what we wanted. We wanted you to do this. It was basically, they might as well have just said, here's, this is how it is. Here's the outcome we want you to get at. So it was silly. It was just a waste of talent and an absolute destruction of trust, because you just, there's no way a team that is going to spend 2 more days going through something when the executive team is trying to control the answer. So I think that's another aspect of it. What I was going to segue to is emotional, because I'm sort of a big fan of emotional health. If you don't have that, then you don't have mental health, and if you don't have mental health, then your decision making is impaired. Just about everything gets impaired. So in terms of the thought process, in the context, being able to be aware of what's going on around you, moving the brackets from this level narrow perception into a much more holistic, interrelated point of view. When it comes to emotion, are there ways of processing emotion in teams that allow you to move through it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say about that. I mean, I suppose I can tackle that from a sort of a listener point of view when we're talking about this dialogue, and from a sharing point of view. And from a listening point of view, when I first sort of participated in this alignment process, it was really frustrating because you're hearing somebody say something and you can't interrupt or influence, or you can't, even though you shouldn't interrupt, of course, you really do want to jump in. And the alignment process is not a conversation. So the feelings that people can have when they feel when there's a lot weighing on that topic, and when there's a lot of there's a lot of implication between the outcomes of what's going to have and somebody's role or sense of identity even, can be really strong. And I think if people, the emotional intelligence piece is being able to sort of observe emotions from a high level rather than have them control you. It's not that people shouldn't have emotions, of course, as we know. So the emotions play a role in how we listen, and how we don't feel threatened by the input of information as if it's just going to influence us and we've got no control over the outcomes. I mean, listening is just listening. But I think from a sharing perspective, when people do listen appreciatively or positively, it can make a huge difference to the amount of and the quality of the um, of what's being shared. But there's also something really interesting called the explanation effect, which is that when somebody isn't in the right environment for listening to something, um, they are actually piecing together and helping their mental models develop in the process of articulating their point of view, which can be very rewarding for both parties, because then both parties are supporting each other in coming up with building bridges towards new thinking together. So the real beauty of it is
Mhm.
having is the meaning that is shared between people in that exchange, as opposed to this is what I think, this is what you think. It's, well, if you think that and that means that, then this means that, and it's building those bridges to actually reach the next level and to move past some of the stuck issues and stuck ways of thinking that can hold us back. So
Mhm.
emotions and how we use those in the process, I think, are key.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was facilitating in the 90s, facilitation training in the 90s, Xerox had come up with a way of doing a timeout for teams. Like we just need to process the emotion, then we can come back in and work with it. So the idea that we need to deny emotion is basically saying I'd prefer to be a robot. And, and that's a big fear everybody has. But if you're denying the emotional dimension of who you are, you're denying your fundamental humanity, because that's who we are first, and then the mental part of it is very much around how do we process our experiences, how do we stay safe within the context we're in. All of those kinds of things are maybe the mental side of it. And to me, it's really the mastery part of it, which is the work that Stefan Segatori does with his emotional mastery, is the inner work of being aware of how you do what you do, like really working with your deeper emotions to be a real genuine leader from my point of view. So I think that we're in an interesting intersection where the old language of emotional intelligence and being able to see it from a level is just like the first step. The second step is saying yes to becoming more fluent with your emotions. So psychological safety is emerged or comes out of that level of connection and awareness and consciousness of your emotional state. So lots of work to be done there. And all we got to do is look at the world events and go, yeah, that would there's somebody very insecure acting out there. Unfortunately, they're a world leader. So it's one of those things that we can see has huge impact when it comes to decisions.
It's a real
Yeah.
shame that that Xerox practice didn't stick and start being used everywhere. That's a really nice idea. It's like timeout.
Yep. Yep. Very intentional timeout. They process the emotions deliberately. There was a name for it. I forget what it is right now, but Xerox had little videos on it and how to do it, and it was one of the more intelligent approaches to emotion that I saw at that period of time, and I think even today would be strongly relevant for teams or organizations. Because a lot of organizations are running off of fear and not doing the reflective work that allows them to pull out their intuition around where things are going.
And what's difficult is that the more that there is going on and the more pressure there is, the more people get overwhelmed and anxious, and the less they're able to take that meta level on their own emotions. It's really difficult. And as you're saying, in terms of global leadership, and leadership in organizations, I mean, there's such an impact that people can make just in the way that they say things or behave.
Yeah.
And you know I think a lot about leadership is needs to be more about maturity, maturity in sharing and in hearing, in understanding. And if that's not there, it's just a bit of a
Yeah.
waste, isn't it?
Well, in fact, when you looked at the COVID response, there was a lot of emotional immaturity on the part of companies when they started putting these little devices to track people, whether people are using their computers or not. I mean, that's about as low a level of maturity as you can possibly get. It's, in the zone of absolute control over someone else versus trust in their ability to, and that you've actually given them a mission that's worth achieving. So it's, I just thought, whoa, people, that's the element of paranoia and fear that an organization can demonstrate. So I think there's lots of room for organizations to mature, emotionally. And I think probably your work would really help knit together the social fabric, the contextual communication environment where people can actually do that. I also think it applies, and so we're into the use when mode. I think it applies where somebody's come in recklessly with a process, made a mess of the social trust that's in an organization. And I know from the experiences that you've got in this wonderful network you've built, that the process you use helps restore that measure of trust and restore the connection that you need in order for organizations to perform, in order for organizations to get anything done, period, at any level. So I think that's, in terms of use when, you've got the teams, out to out team application, but of course that's fractal. It diffuses throughout the organization if there's cross-pollination between the teams. What else would you say, the experience that you bring forward into this practice, when else would you use it? Like
So,
the
I mean,
application side.
so let's just say that the strategy of an organization is solid and that people want to be there and fundamentally want to do a good job. So we have to assume that. Um, and ultimately, any goal that a team or teams of teams in an organization or part of it want to achieve depends on people being well connected and aligned. And so the kind of deployment of this, the bit we didn't talk about, is that a lot of people just don't know that alignment is a thing and that it can be sorted out. And it starts with data on the perception comparison of capturing exactly what people think about the effectiveness of their work, comparing those, and coming up with data around how far apart people are and what really needs to be discussed, and not taking everything, just maybe taking 10 of those data points that obviously look the most relevant, and the most dealable with, given the maturity of the team, whether they're a senior team or a delivery team, and working through those. And that's something that can apply to at the beginning of a change process. It's something that can apply to people being stuck during a change process that's going wrong. It can be applied to post M&A environments where teams just have a completely different point of view and perspectives and need to coordinate those together, as well as a new direction for the company. What does everybody else understand about that? How does that relate to our work? What are we doing here? You can have side conversations with people, or a proper briefing where people are told what it is, and a kind of a conversation. But those conversations, like we said, with so many things going on in the workplace and so many different ways of looking at things, that'll be a nice kind of, if we go back to the analogy of tidying up, that'll be a bit of a sort of jiffy cloth on the table surface going, right, that's about it. But you sometimes need a really deep clean on what are we doing here? How are we going to do that? What is the information that we need to know? Who's doing what? I mean, right down to the roles, values, or anything else. But like I said, doing a complete sweep off where are we misaligned, and then just picking the most pertinent insights has a huge plays a huge role in helping teams achieve what they want to achieve and do it more effectively. And yeah, it's an exciting area because you don't necessarily need to know about how everybody's preferences are, or what everybody's generational differences are, or what the latest understanding is of different cultures. You just need to appreciate that everybody is different, and that we just need to check these things out from time to time.
Yeah, and the beauty of it is everybody is different. We're not all talking to we're not looking in the mirror and talking to ourselves. We're working with very different people who bring incredible value to how things move forward. So, anything else we should have talked about and didn't?
Oh, there's probably a ton of stuff we could have talked about and
I
didn't.
know,
But
I know.
it's always
So
it's
true.
always a pleasure, though. I'm really pleased that you're so, you've switched on about this whole topic yourself with all of the material that you've written, and it's lovely just being able to connect with all of that. So I guess we're both fans of slowing down to speed up, really, through connecting properly with people.
Yeah, absolutely. Where do people go to find out more about what you're doing?
Yeah, so mirroralignment.com is
It's
the
pretty
site.
straightforward.
We have a network of practitioners who are trained to teach people how to run this process and who can actually run the process when it's better to have an external facilitator. And there's diagnostic that we've got that diagnoses where are the gaps in your team. And it takes a little bit of people bravery to want to look in the mirror, but after you've looked in the mirror a few times, it's not that scary.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Thanks very much, Lindsay, for being on the program. I hope our listeners got quite a bit out of this, but I'll publish it also on the podcast platforms next week. So thanks again for joining me.
Lovely. Thank you, Donna.